Howie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
For the audience, Howie and I have started to get to know each other over the course of our involvement in an Atmos group, which you've heard me talk about from time to time. What I like to do, Howie, is start with what I call the state of the state, which is to say, what's going on today? What do you consider yourself? Producer, engineer, mixer, etc. And where are you? What kind of stuff are you doing? And then we'll dive into some of the more early stage stuff.
Currently, I would say I'm 90% mixing music. The majority of that is still stereo, though I'm doing more Atmos mixing as well. I had an experience 2 or 3 weeks ago with an artist named Chili Gonzalez, who's a friend of mine, and we've worked together a lot over the years. And he's been touring for about a year, and his drummer couldn't do his Toronto show. And so he asked me if I would play drums on that show because I'm a drummer kind of before anything else. And so I only mention this because what am I doing? It was a kind of a big deal for me because I haven't been playing music at all. And I had the opportunity to play in kind of the most prestigious theater in the country here called Massey Hall, which is a pretty famous old venue in Toronto. And so for about 5 days there, I felt like a musician again, but now I'm back just kind of doing this. So that's the state of affairs.
Very cool. And the studio that you're at, where is that? Is that in your home or is that in a separate building outside of your home?
So it's a separate building behind my home. There used to be a garage here, but we knocked it down. And a guy named Terry Medwedik designed this space as a studio. He's done a lot of pretty amazing recording studios, and he was amazing. It was really great, and it sounds fantastic, and it's super comfortable. But yeah, the answer is that this is behind my house, where from the outside on the street, you would just think it's a garage.
Great commute.
I love it. It's my kind of commute.
Let's go back in time. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up just outside of Toronto in the suburbs, same area that people hear the guys from Rush talk about, this area called Willowdale. Not the same generation as those guys, but it's about an hour north of downtown, where you kind of dream of coming downtown every weekend. And very suburban, lower middle class neighborhood.
What was the role of music or technology in your home? Did you play in school band, or did you have brothers or sisters who listened to music, or or your parents? What was it like growing up?
Yeah, my parents are both very musical, but neither of them were very proficient on an instrument. My dad played piano by ear. My mom was kind of, and still is, obsessed with classical music, and she's got some kind of OCD tendencies. So there'd be stacks of books about Mozart around and then someone else. And my dad listened to a lot of jazz. Yeah, and there was kind of like some show-tuney music. There was music happening in the house a lot, but I didn't like most of it. When I was maybe 10, my parents, I hope this doesn't become a traumatic experience. My parents joined this thing called Harmony Ranch, which was like a trailer park about 45 minutes out of town, where we would go on the weekends and stay there. And they had barbershop quartets and stuff. On the drive up there, my mom and my dad and my sister would all be singing in 3-part harmony, and I'd just be sticking my head out the window trying to get away from all of it. That's kind of my upbringing in a nutshell.
Was your sister older or younger?
She's a year older.
Okay.
Yeah. She also very musical, but never really pursued it.
That's a scene out of some like comedy movie with the parents singing and with the sisters and you sticking your head out the window.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, unfortunately.
When did you first become aware of audio production or become fascinated with how records sounded?
I think I was always fascinated by that. I mean, I'm old enough that when I first heard, to mention Rush again, I started playing drums, and I didn't know he had 2 bass drums. I didn't know that was a thing. So I thought he was doing everything with his floor tom and his bass drum. And so I would focus on trying to learn these parts that way. And I mean, growing up, like in high school, I wasn't in like the AV club or anything like that. I had no interest in the technical side, but if I was at a party, I was the guy like messing with the stereo. So it was more of a musician's approach than a technical approach. And I knew the difference between a good sounding record and a bad sounding record. And someone gave me a pair of headphones when I was about 13. They were these HOWIE headphones, if that was the name of the brand, AIWA. They had a radio built in and an antenna. And I remember my life changed when I first heard those things. I'd never heard it. It was just like my brain exploded. It was such a beautiful sound. And I didn't take those things off for months. I just listened to the radio.
Were you someone who would spend any time looking at album credits, trying to decipher what it is you were reading?
As I got older, I was more curious about it. I mean, it's funny because I realize now I've retained a lot of that information when if something comes on TV, one of those classic rock docs or whatever, I'm like, I know half that shit already somehow. I don't remember actively trying to learn it. I was so fascinated by more about who was playing on what records than who was making the records. I mean, it came to me very, I think, differently than a lot of engineers. When I was a teenager, I started recording songs for the band that I was in. I kind of just continued doing that until I'm here, where at a certain point, people started saying, "Oh, I like the sound of that thing you recorded. Would you record me?" And I'd be like, "I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll do it." And it was all trial and error. I didn't go to school or anything to learn engineering. It was always just chasing that sound from those headphones. Like, how do people get things to sound like that? And just messing around until things sound good.
You were a drummer, so were you at any point thinking I'm going to be a drummer, rock star in a band, or did audio kind of intercept that thought?
No, I thought I would be a drummer, rock star in a band for sure. There's kind of a few different stages of what I've done. Like I was a drummer since I was a little kid, but always had an ability with melody and harmony. And as I got into my 20s, I started recording my own music on 4-track. And again, it was kind of some peers who were like, "You should release this." And I kind of thought, no, nobody would be interested in that. But then I did. And I had a couple record deals in Europe, small recording contracts where I toured and under my own name, where I'd play guitar and sing, and I had a band and kind of played all the instruments on my records before everybody did that. I remember it was like, that was a cool thing to do. And now it's just like everybody on Instagram. But there was a bit of cachet to that back then in the 90s and early aughts.
Mm-hmm.
And then throughout that time, people were starting to ask me, because I was taking my own music a bit more seriously and my own recordings a bit more seriously. That's when kind of word of mouth, people started asking me if I would record them. And I did, not too often, but I did. And then when I kind of put the kibosh on my own career, I just decided, okay, I was just going to shift. Like, I made 4 records, and by the time I was supporting the 4th record, I was basically in nervous breakdown mode and just stopped. I didn't even want to listen to music at all. It was just everything about music made me very anxious. It became this like survival mode where like I had to play shows. I had to somehow eke out a living doing what I was doing. And it was not a healthy lifestyle. And at that point, like once I just stopped everything, I kind of decided, okay, how can I continue doing things with music that don't require me? I was never comfortable standing up at the front of the stage fucking singing and playing guitar.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't like doing it. I loved playing drums. And like, we started this conversation with that experience at Massey Hall where I was nervous about making sure I got all the cues and parts right throughout the concert. But like stepping on stage, I wasn't nervous. I'm very comfortable behind a drum kit. Like I just feel like the most safe of anyone in that theater of thousands of people. I just felt like, okay, this is my place. I'm really comfortable here. But singing and playing songs, I was not comfortable at all. And a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure. And I remember seeing interviews with rock stars who were like, oh, I don't like touring. And I'd always think, just stop it. No one's putting a gun to your head and making you have a career as a rock star. Just don't fucking do it.
Right.
And so I just stopped. I'm just like, I'm not going to do this if I don't enjoy this. And I just really started enjoying serving others and trying to help facilitate their musical visions. You know, someone told me, I think it's in French. I think in France, like there's no word for producer. It's actually called facilitator. Mm-hmm. That's your role on a record. And it's like, I'm totally comfortable with that. I satisfied my ego making my own records and getting reviews and being on stage. So I'm able now to kind of, you know, when someone's really happy with the work that I've done on their record, like that's feels amazing.
Do you think in some ways it's easier to be on this side of the glass instead of on the stage?
Oh, it's way easier, without a question. I mean,
yeah,
you know, if you make a great record for someone, nobody really talks about what you've done. If the record is shit, or if it doesn't do well, then you can get blamed for it. So there is that pressure, you know what I mean? But it's not, at least for me personally, I just don't like people staring at what I'm doing. So for example, like in my like I don't mix attended. I don't like people being here when I'm mixing, because that to me feels kind of like performance.
Oh yeah.
So I'm still not in that mode of performance and being observed. I like to like just let the work stand on its own. If you have changes you'd like me to make, I'm happy to make changes. If not, even better, but it's way easier. And there was a huge difference between when I was a musician. I kind of always felt like most of the people I was talking to, like, were they going to be able to help me? Were they going to be able to help me get a show, sell records, do like all of the kind of industry people? It was, there were always these gatekeepers. And I found that really intimidating and annoying. But I did notice as soon as I started doing some production and mixing, that flipped. The way that those people talked to me was much different. It was much more respectful, and they were asking me to do something for them instead of the other way around, which is it's a big difference.
At what point did you move on from 4-tracks and graduate to something bigger?
I don't know if it was bigger. You know, on my own records, like I think of one of them in particular, half of it was done on 4-track and the other half was like on ADAT. And I didn't know how to use an ADAT. My friend Hayden, who lives up the road, he had a couple of ADATs, and so I did some recording at his place. That was kind of the transition, was from 4-track to ADAT, which just made it easier to have more tracks. Then I got Pro Tools, which to this day, I've never, you know, when a young gun comes in here, I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, I still know my basic commands. I don't know any of these shortcuts. I still use my mouse to like go up to the top corner to change views and stuff. So I really do operate it very much like a tape machine. And then plugins are what make it, of course, nothing like a tape machine. I can't recall a clear moment of making that switch, but I'm still in and out of studios, and I had a part-time job when I was in my late 20s assisting a sound effects engineer. Nicest guy, former musician, bass player, great bass player. And he used to cut effects for this show that at the time was called Kratz Creatures, which then turned into another show called Wild Kratz, which is still on the air.
Oh, yeah. My kids used to watch Wild Kratz.
Yeah. So I was cutting effects, assisting him at a recording studio, like 45 minutes out of the city. He'd pick me up in his car and we'd drive out. And he was just really nice. And he used to say, he was very flattering and say, you know, musicians make the best sound effects editors because we get it. But I was cutting the tape. So we were doing, there'd be scenes of dolphins underwater, and I'd have to like lay underwater effects for a 30-minute show in real time onto tape. He'd go out and get coffee or whatever and come back, and it was a really, really, really different time. But I learned how to use tape and work in a studio more there than I did with my recording studio experiences growing up, which were a couple dozen times. And of course, a million times since then, but everyone's using Pro Tools now. So
in the journey as an audio professional, were you looking towards anybody? I mean, this guy clearly was a mentor in some respects, but were there others locally? And in addition to the maybe potential local mentors, were there people out in the engineering world that you were paying attention to?
No. And I wish there were. And I think about that a lot. I had the opportunity to meet Bob Clearmountain a few months ago before the fires. He was in town doing an Atmos demo, and I got to speak to him for a few minutes. And after that conversation, I thought, man, I would really be doing things differently had I had the opportunity to shadow someone like that for a week even. Much like with music, I've just kind of learned everything by trial and error with production and mixing. I know there are a million videos out there where people teach you how to do things, and part of me is I just don't want to know. Like, I feel there's still something to it to me that feels like magic. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That I feel like when you learn how someone else is doing the magic trick, you're kind of let down. It's like on one hand, you're like, that's so fucking cool. On the other hand, it's like, oh man, I kind of wish I didn't know that. There's a bit of that kind of ignorance that might make my job a little harder, and it might take me longer to get a result where if, someone can just say, oh, you're supposed to do a roll off at 60 hertz there if you've got this and that. And just to know that kind of, and whenever I hear someone say that, like, the nasal frequencies at about 500, and I'm like, I just remember it for the rest of my life. But I don't want to remember, I don't want to know all that stuff. I don't know what it is. There's just something about being able to just discover things as you go that keeps the job part interesting, especially if you're turd polishing, which, we all have to do. And if the song's not good, it's not particularly a fun job. Don't get me wrong. I'd way rather be doing this than anything else. Mm-hmm. But when the music is good and the client is totally behind what you're doing, I mean, fuck, that's like the best job ever.
I've often said this, and I say it with obviously great respect, but when I see some of these videos that we're talking about where they're like, oh yeah, and then I just, I slap this and do this and tweak this, and you're like, you have perfectly good tracks to work with. How hard could it be? And then I think of all the turd polishing I have done over the years with less than stellar musicianship and or tracks, or, anything or quality. And it just sometimes I get frustrated when I see those videos. I'm like, I want to see a video where you're given the absolute shittiest possible performance, quality, like all of it. I want to see you turn that into something magical.
I want to see your reaction to all of the revisions they want you to do, because those are the ones that ask for all the revisions, right? It's so inevitable when the song's not great and they think that you're gonna put like magic fairy dust on everything somehow. If the song's not good, like, it's just, everybody knows this, but it's not really spoken enough. Like, a shit recording that's a good song, it's not going to really bug you that much. I don't want to diss anybody, but I remember, it was like the first couple Strokes records or something. Those songs were great. I remember not thinking the record sounded particularly great. And I think that was part of their thing, was the sound of those records sounding like that. Nobody's going to say it's not good if the songs are good. I just told a singer the other day, he's like, I'm worried my vocal's a bit too loud in this song. I'm like, never heard anybody say the vocal's too loud. I've heard a lot of people say that the vocal's not loud enough. Can't hear what you're saying. Turn the vocal up. throughout my life, but like I've never heard anyone say, go listen to a Beatles record. Those are some fucking loud vocals. Nobody's ever said vocals are too loud.
Yeah.
It's just not a thing.
Once again, along in the journey of being an audio pro, did you find difficulty in survival of making enough money to do this?
Yeah, of course. And it's still, I've been probably, quote unquote professional, at least in just relying on this and only this for maybe about 15 years plus. Started slow, and then I kind of really hit a rhythm. And then what I've noticed is post-pandemic, especially for mixing, the middle class is kind of getting sucked out of this industry so that indie people really have every tool that they need, truly. So it's a matter of, do you want to spend money on someone's experience or not? Because odds are they don't really have tools that, people winning engineering Grammys are recording things in their bedrooms, right? So if you're good at what you do and you put in the work and the time and you're a musical person, you don't need to really have any money at all to make a record sound good. You just don't. And young people are starting to realize that. And so some of those people who may have hired me 10 years ago probably wouldn't hire me now. And for good reason. I wouldn't have hired me. When I made my own records, I wasn't hiring anybody to do it. So that's why I say like the middle class element is just, it's kind of just going away. And then of course, all the labels have a mandate to hire professionals. Atmos is a bit different because, people like ourselves have invested in the infrastructure to be able to do it properly, and hear it properly. So those are jobs that I'm getting now that someone who's, 25 and working in a bedroom might not get. Doesn't mean they wouldn't necessarily be great at it, but they don't have the tools. So it's a mixed blessing having all of these tools be really accessible to everybody. But now I'm just finding when I'm busy, I'm really busy. And when I'm not busy, there's a lot of that like, okay, something better be coming. And it used to be all of my friends would say like, yeah, you say that. And then in 2 weeks, you're like super busy again. That's a bit weird now. That's not like, in just my own personal experience, past 2 years, I've noticed a huge difference where like I'll be really busy for 5 or 6 weeks. And then there might be 3 weeks with like no work at all. And that can get kind of scary. And then I'll have a whole bunch of weeks with a lot of work again. But the time in between the jobs seems to be expanding for me. I haven't yet cracked into this kind of A-list major label thing. I kind of exist on the margins of all of that. And my work is almost always bottom-up, artist-based recommendation from another artist whose work I've done, as opposed to a manager or an A&R person saying, oh, get Howie Beck to do it, which is great, but it just means like less big budget stuff.
Do you ever, or have you ever thought, oh man, this isn't working, I got to go do something else?
I've thought, man, this isn't working, but I can't do anything else.
I know what the hell else am I going to do?
Yeah, I heard an interview with Woody Allen once where he was saying he's never made any money off of any of his movies. And when he had a couple of movies that were successful in the 70s, he either put all of that money back into his next film, or in a couple of cases, he bought apartments in New York. That's how he made his living. And, I made some smart-ish decisions 20 years ago in Toronto where, I bought a home and I bought a second property and I rent both of them out. And that provides a huge amount of both stress and relief to me because I can occasionally say no to projects that I don't want to do and know that there's some kind of income coming in. But if I was starting now, I wouldn't be able to do it. Like homes in Toronto are bonkers.
Yeah.
It's like $1.5 million to start for like something in the city. It's crazy.
It's nice when you can be in that position, though, to say no.
I've not done that a lot. I've done it mostly when I've thought the people were going to be difficult to deal with. And you can get a sense of that before things start. Sometimes it's worth it to do that work. I'm old enough now that I'm just kind of like, this has to really be worth it. Like if I'm not super busy, I won't say no. But, you know, there's a mental health aspect to what we're doing as well, where I got with my career as a musician, where it was kind of like, I don't enjoy this. Why am I doing this? Like, I really don't enjoy this. All of the parts that I do enjoy about this are not parts that are going to make me money. And I have to stop just doing the stuff I'm supposed to do, the work part. Like I despised touring. A friend of mine was saying, well, that's the job part. The making the records, that's the fun part. That's not a job. The touring is the job. The interviews are the job. The shitty sleeps and traveling, that's the job. But I also have friends who are very, very successful musicians, continue to tour, make great money on the road, and they love that lifestyle. Really just depends on who you are. But yeah, being in music for a living is not for the faint of heart. If you're working independently for yourself, if you want to work, get a union job somewhere doing audio at for you be PBS or the CBC or whatever, that's a whole other thing. And you have benefits and stuff. That's not been my experience at all. Like this is completely scrappy, put together. I don't even know how. I don't know how I've figured this out.
It is truly a hustle in some respects. And over time, I'm finding that there's things that I do now that were not on my bingo card when I set out to do this. Just the amount of entrepreneurial, self-promotion based work one has to do to stay on people's radars is, it's daunting sometimes.
I'm really not good at it and I really don't like doing it. And that's the only reason I would like to have a manager. And the managers I've spoken to over the past couple of years, I've said literally, I need someone to get my name in the conversation. I don't go out. I got a 10-year-old kid. When I'm not, with him, I'm trying to recover from being with him. And the last thing I'm doing is going to a fucking bar. There was an industry event at a recording studio a couple of weeks ago that I got invited to. They had an Atmos room and I lasted 8 minutes in there. I just couldn't handle it. It was everyone standing, holding their phones. And I just couldn't do it. When I was a musician in my 20s and had the hustle and a few drinks in me, I'd be the last guy to leave and I'd make some connections and stuff. It's just not where I am at all in my life now. And I'm kind of just at the mercy of my work to get me more work, hoping that people say, who did this? This sounds good. Let's get him to do it. Don't get me wrong. I'll still reach out to people, of course, but the schmooze, I'm just not there anymore.
Maybe it's somewhat triggering for me. I'm not sure, but I've been in those situations where you're at an event and then you have what I would call the tourists who come in and, and you're like, what are you, like 12?
Yeah. And they're 30.
Yeah.
So it's, I was talking to a manager recently who was saying they were at a label meeting at a major label and their experience, they've been in the industry for a long time, and their experience when they were younger was that they would leave these label meetings and they'd be really inspired to help the artists on the label. There'd be these business plans and like big dreams to like try to break these artists and hopefully it would work, but probably not. But just they're inspired with all these ideas. And he was just saying now when he has to go to a label meeting now and then, he's like, it's just fucking pathetic. It's all about social media. The people running the meetings they don't have musical vision at all. They're kind of shareholder props to try to, keep shit above water and come up with marketing concepts that aren't creative, that are more like, okay, well, if we drop a whole bunch of singles instead of an album, then we can have the record be in the marketplace longer. That's the extent of like marketing, as opposed to, someone told me the other day there was a Red Bull campaign. I don't drink Red Bull, but there was a Red Bull campaign where when they started out as a company, and I don't know if this is even true, but they would hire people to go around to kind of cool events, raves, whatever. And outside where all the cigarette butts and stuff, they would like crumple up a Red Bull can and throw it down. So that at all these events, this subconsciously, you're associating all this fun with Red Bull. And people were assuming that people were at these parties drinking Red Bull. And that's kind of how I think of the classic music industry in terms of being creative, but that's just not the way it is anymore. And I guess that's fine because nobody buys records anymore. So, but it's a bit of the commodification of music is just very different.
Maybe because I just thrive in this environment, is working with independent artists where you don't have to, go through some stupid portal to get paid at the end. It's just, it's a small band, and you can cut your budget a little bit and you get paid at the end.
Yep.
And it's a fun thing. And then, I guess I'm trying to embrace like working more with independent artists who are selling on Bandcamp and trying to like operate outside of the traditional big band streaming where there's no money.
I don't know how people do it now, to be honest. Like, it used to be you would make a record and then you'd go on tour to support your record so you could sell records and hopefully recoup and make some money. It's the exact opposite now, where you make a record so that you can go on the road and hopefully make some money at shows, because nobody's buying the record. It's not, you lose money on every record. I'm really glad I'm not getting into this business right now. I don't, my nephew's a really very talented musician. He went to Berkeley, and I've talked to him. He's like, he doesn't know what he's going to do. I mean, there's always a place for live music, and hopefully there'll always be an opportunity to be compensated to play live music. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, in the history of entertainment, purchasing recorded music is just a little blip.
And occasionally I come across these situations, and one of them fairly recently, Vance Powell was in San Francisco, and I went over and paid him a visit. He was mixing Fish, the jam band. He was mixing in the broadcast truck for the live pay-per-view thing that Fish has. And I just kind of sat back and was observing and asking questions about the whole operation. And I realized these Fish guys have some crazy amount of savvy and self-contained financial prowess that I was just so impressed by. I'm not a Fish fan, but I could not deny, I was just like, their fans love them. They've got a culty type Grateful Dead thing going. And then they're selling these streams, and then you can buy any recording really from the last, 20 plus years that they've done. You can buy a download or a CD, or like, it's shocking. And you see that and you think, man, it's too bad that more bands can't get away with doing something like this.
Well, I think a unique thing about them, a couple things. One, they're a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is they've been doing this, I don't know how long, 30 years?
Yeah, if not
more.
Longer.
So if that same band were plunked out of time and plopped into 2025, they couldn't do that. It would take them 30 years to get to the point where they could do that. And along that journey, they wouldn't be making any money. So it just couldn't happen. I'm sure there are some exceptions I've worked on records over the past couple of years where, I mean, these are records that are getting on the year-end lists of, New York Times and like very, very, very well established critical mass where the bands are breaking up within the year of putting out the record because they can't support themselves. Everything's really expensive on the road. I'm hearing a lot of that.
I certainly don't have all the answers. And I got to experience putting out records and making videos in the 90s as a drummer in bands. And we didn't have all the tools that people have today. It's too bad that that the world cannot come together and go, let's take a little bit of the best of like the 90s and then blend it with all this technology that we have now and see if everybody can like make a living.
I've mixed a few records for these guys from India called Parak and Singh. Fantastic. Awesome. Great records. And from what I recall, I think one of them worked in his dad's hotel. I mean, they worked hard to make money to make their records. In Canada, there's a bit of a strange funding system here, and I have mixed feelings about it. But it can be annoying when someone wants to work with you and the discussion comes down to budget and they're like, well, we'll have to see if we get funding or not. I'm kind of like, that's not really how it works. Like that's it's so unique to hear. And look, there should be funding for arts. I think it's great. I'm a very liberal minded person in general, but when that's happening, it's like, oh, come on. You know what I mean? I've worked with plenty of people who bust their asses to be able to do what they're doing. My grandpa used to say, when you earn money to buy something, you treat that thing differently than if someone gives you something.
Oh, yeah.
And I think sometimes there's a bit of an entitlement. If people have received, I have to be careful here, but if people have received some arts funding, they might be taking for granted what they're doing.
I agree 100%. Like, if you give a kid, a big thing versus if it's something that they really desire versus having them work for it, changes the dynamic so much.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, I'm kind of old school in that way. That's how my parents would deal with things.
There are a couple artists I've worked with who never get this funding, and they're so great. One of them, has to play in a fucking piano bar to make money to make his records. And there's not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's when I see other people who are driving nice cars and getting funding to make records, that's the problem. It's like, how is this being implemented properly? Who does it? Who's implementing it and how? Yeah. I mean, this is an issue.
Let's talk about the studio that you've got. And you obviously came to a point where you'd had some successes to build this place, I assume.
Kind of. It was, building this studio was as much a personal decision as it was a kind of business decision. It was one of those like, build it and they shall come or whatever. There was definitely 100% that. I was very busy working for sure, but this was in my house. This was on the third floor of my house, and I was living with a woman, and I was making my own records at the time, and I just couldn't have anybody else around while I was doing it. It was just impossible for me to be creative if someone else was around. And ultimately that partially led to the downfall of the relationship. And I promised myself, if I'm ever in another relationship with another human being, I will not have a studio in my home. I remember our couples therapist, when I was talking about the house, she was like, maybe we should call the house the studio because that's what it is. And I was like, oh, this is a problem, and so when I met my now ex and she moved in, I said to her, I'm going to build a studio out back, which I did. And I remortgaged my house to do it. So it wasn't like all these crazy producer royalties, just bought me a studio. It wasn't like that. It was another investment in myself, saying like, I'll be able to afford this because I'm going to keep working. And it was the same way when I bought the house. I was like, I'm going to put a studio upstairs and it's, necessity is the mother of invention. It's going to force me to work so I can pay for it. A lot of people's parents would tell their kids, you need a backup plan. You need a backup plan. My parents used to tell me that. I think that's, if you know you're going to be doing this, I don't know if a backup plan is a great idea. It wasn't for me. I think I would have used that backup plan when things got really hard. And for me, that would have been a bad idea, me personally. But yeah, it can still, working in the arts, it's, again, there's not much of a middle class now. So you're either kind of killing it or you're freaking out. In my experience, I experienced both those things.
Yeah.
Still. So
we know it's hard, but what have been the highlighted victories along the path for you? Like, certain records you've worked on or experiences you've had?
Yeah. I love being the guy riding in on the horse, saving the day. There have been a couple of records that I've worked on that were already mixed, where the artists were not happy with the results and kind of had me listen to it and said, what do you think? I said, I think I can do better, and did. And getting phone messages from artists saying like, oh my God, you saved my record. Those are huge highlights. Unfortunately, with production particularly, and I understand this having been an artist, when you're working as a producer with an artist, they can be extremely complimentary and they can really appreciate what you're doing. But once that record's out, the artist is still working that record. You're on to whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. And after a year of that, the artist can kind of forget how much involvement you actually had in that project. That can be a bit disappointing. But again, I understand it, because I think most people, especially in the arts, don't really want to think that they need help artistically. I think that's just human nature. And over time, I think roles, I know a lot of situations where people have been, where artists were nominated for Grammys, and, producer, people involved in the records, like who had huge roles in those records, are kind of not quite forgotten, but their roles are kind of hugely diminished over time. And again, there's no malice on the part of the artist at all. This isn't like some intentional thing that's happening. I just think it's human nature to kind of forget that you didn't do it on your own. And maybe we as engineers kind of, as human nature, kind of overinflate our role and how much we were able to help. There's probably some balance in there. But yeah, when an artist, when you kind of come in and save the day, I love it. That's the best. It's really, it's great for the ego. It really just feels awesome. I've also been really enjoying having artists in here listening to their Atmos mixes, because, I had a band in here recently listen to their record. They each came in on different occasions, and all of them had a similar reaction, which was like, oh my God, I'm so glad to hear the record this way. And one of them wrote me a really beautiful letter afterwards saying that the experience was life affirming. That's great. Like, how do you beat that? That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To be part of that is really an amazing experience, and makes me love Atmos even more. I still have mixed feelings about Atmos in general, because there's so many shitty Atmos mixes out there, and it's still so hard for people to consume it in a way that's as impactful as we experience it in a room with speakers. However, I will say, and without trying to plug them, I was in a Sonos room recently and it sounded fucking awesome. So that's, there's a $3,000 option out there for anyone who can afford a really nice home stereo system and wants to experience that. Like, it now exists. It's not just headphones and faking it. It's like, yeah, it exists.
And shit, if you want to go and spend even less, just getting one Sonos Era 300 as a starting point, and then eventually maybe getting a second one. Because I think in the system, I think you and I have talked about this in previous conversations with our friends. You heard a Sonos system went with a soundbar, a sub, and two Era 300s on the rear.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Sonos is really, I know that there's a lot of kerfluffle over the mishandling of their software app.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, but like what a disaster on a major level. But in general, I think the spirit of it and what we do is aided by those products.
For sure. For sure. I mean, I wish it was as easy to use as a Bluetooth speaker. I can't tell you the amount of, like, I have a few little Sonos speakers around just for portable fun. And although this is a problem in general, where it's, if my son wants to hear a song, I should be able to just go dink and hear a song. But sometimes it's like there's so many steps to get a fucking song from your phone into a speaker that by the time it's coming out of the speaker, he's like out playing soccer. It's like, I do this for a living. I should be able to get music into a speaker in moments. But sometimes it's like, oh, it didn't connect. Now connected. I was going through the app. Is it going through the Wi-Fi? It's like,
oh, you're logged out of the app. Now you got to log back in and remember your password and like,
yeah. And I honestly, like, I also think like Apple keeps shit in the bed with everything and it music related. It used to be so intuitive. Now I'm talking 10 years ago, using iTunes, and Apple Music to me it's almost everything about it is counterintuitive, especially the Atmos stuff. It's really, it's fucking irritating.
Don't get me started. Yeah. One of my last guests, Imra Ramazanoglu, he was on a few episodes ago, and we were just kind of telling it as it is.
Yeah.
That we love Apple for all of everything they've done, and their help in getting Atmos out there has been fantastic, but their decision making about how they present our mixes in comparison to Amazon and Tidal, who, if you listen to our mixes there, it's like it's representational of what we've put effort into. And then you go to Apple and you're just like, what the actual fuck?
Well, and also, are you even playing the Atmos mix, and how do you get there? That's the problem of explaining this to clients, where it's like, okay, first of all, do you have Apple headphones? Which ones do you have? Okay, there's a whole conversation. Then you do, and you have to walk them through turning everything on. The spatialized stereo should not be a fucking thing. And then it's like head tracking or not head tracking. Is it on or is it off? Is it always on? Is it, it's not cool. And then it seems the settings seem to somehow change on their own, where I'm like, okay, well, I did not select that. And somehow something has been selected for me. And then it's like, okay, it's different for your laptop, and it's different for your Apple TV, and it's different for your Mac Studio, and it's different if you have speakers or headphones or which kind of headphones you're using. It's just, people aren't interested in any of that shit. They just want to listen to fucking music. And if it's complicated, they're not going to care.
Right.
Half the kids listen to music out of their phone. In fact, I listened to something in Atmos on my phone that sounded better than it did on the headphones. So, and it was an Atmos mix. So, yeah.
And I hate to shit on Apple in that way, because I'm grateful for a lot of the stuff that they made and their role in the Atmos thing. But holy shit, people.
I think there's a bureaucratic element going on, because the Apple company that we grew up with, where it was like the artist's thing, I mean, they're the biggest company in the world now. That's not what they are anymore. So I'm sure they have that division of, artsy types, but I don't think that's ultimately who they're serving. I don't think that's where they're making their money. I don't want to shit on them either, but it's made my job more difficult. It
has, and I think if Steve Jobs were alive, he would not let it go down this way.
No. I mean, even something as simple as their requirements for delivery versus the quality of what they're distributing, it's fucking insane. Like, we're expected to deliver to the highest quality, as we should be. Give it to the consumer that way. Don't make shit sound gurgly in the rear speakers. There's no, and if people want to talk about bandwidth and the expense of it, fuck it. They're the biggest company in the world. So
Right.
it's like, spend the money, figure it out. If you want to sell this tech, like, stop fucking around and do it properly. It's supposed to be an audiophile experience. I haven't used their headset yet, but I would imagine that the visuals on their headset aren't the quality of an old tube TV. I'm assuming it's at least 1080p or 4K, at least, if not higher than 4K. And they should be delivering audio with that same mandate, period.
Yeah.
If they're trying to sell this product.
Fingers crossed somebody at Apple is listening to this conversation going, wow, this is like the second time Matt has had a guest on and they've talked shit about us. Hopefully somebody will get the message and do something about it, because it's untenable, and it's really making our it's making our job, as you say, harder, because of, you know, in the Atmos world, we need this problem to disappear. We need them to step up and do the right thing.
I just don't want to present something to someone that's supposed to be amazing with excuses.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about this before. Someone gave me advice once when I had a cold and I was about to perform a concert, and they don't say you have a cold. Nobody wants to know. No excuses. Don't ever deliver a mix to someone and say, yeah, this will be better, but nobody cares. It's just, what are you hearing? What's the end product? Because that's what people are consuming. Don't make them imagine something better. Make it better. You know, it's that, especially for something that's being touted as this, you know, high resolution audio that is supposed to really outdo surround, infinitely outdo surround. Don't make those additional speakers sound like they're underwater. You know, I know there's some logic to like, oh, well, when all the speakers are firing, you don't hear that. If it's in headphones, you don't hear it, and because of clustering and everything else, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I'm just like, if I have a client here and they're listening to something and I'm like, oh, fuck, you know what? Check out this Avalon mix by Bob Clearmountain. This sounds fucking amazing. And I put it on, and it sounds great. And then they press my, you know, rear speakers button, and it sounds like, and they ask why it sounds like that. What's the answer? The answer is bandwidth, Apple.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, shifting topics on you, because we're just about out of time.
Okay.
You've been at this a while. I'm sure you've had your ups and your downs. As an audio professional, whether we're talking to newbies or old dogs, do you have a financial philosophy as an audio professional to survive that you would like to relay to others? Or is it a work in progress always?
Well, both. I mean, don't spend money on stupid shit like cigarettes.
Oh.
You know, like, it's just stupid. So that, and, you know, if you're good at it and you know you're good at it, and not just because you think you're good at it, when you fucking know that you're good at it and you possess an ability that's unique that only a handful of people can do as well as you, and you're sure of it, and you kind of know that in your soul, putting aside, you know, inevitable imposter syndrome that we all have. You got just I think your best investment is in yourself. There are all these people online, you know, compounding interest. Do that with yourself when you're young. You know, when you're young, don't spend money on stupid shit. And, you know, I smoked for many, many years. I think if I took all that money and had put it into something smarter, like for my own career. But yeah, that's what I would say. But it's hard, and there's no guarantees. You know, I don't have health insurance. I don't have, you know, what do you guys call it? What's your retirement thing?
Oh, 401k.
Yeah, like I don't have any of that shit. So I've invested in myself. I've made a couple smart investments at the beginning. I would also say, like, buy a house, figure it out. I know it sounds ridiculous, and it was like houses are too expensive. Like, There are creative ways around figuring out how to do that. The way I bought my house was that I rented out half of it and lived in the other half, and still do, actually. Having that allowed me to build this studio, because I was able to take the equity from my home and put it into the studio for my work. But yeah, certainly you don't want to get into this business for money. That's definitely, if your main goal is to make money, it's not doing this. And yeah, invest in yourself, and when I say invest in yourself, that's not necessarily like, you don't need to go to a really expensive university. You can always intern at a studio if you want to learn how to do things, but mostly just like spend the time. You got to put in the time.
Yeah.
And you have to be good at it. You need both of those things. It's not just going to come, and you have to love it. You have to love doing it. You really do. It's a shitty job if you don't love doing it.
When you say you don't have health insurance, but don't you have Canadian health insurance?
Yes. But in terms of like, if I want to go buy medication, like it's not covered. I don't know if it is over there. I'm just saying, like, the friends I have who are teachers or, work in jobs where they have benefits, that's not this. This is not a benefits related career. Hey, I have a buddy who's a producer engineer who lives in Nashville who had a medical problem 10 years ago, and he had to borrow like $30,000. That is not something that happens in Canada, knock on wood, but that's kind of horrifying to me to think of that concept as being in America. I mean, I don't really know how it works in the States. I think you have to buy everything privately, right?
Yeah, generally. And your health insurance is typically tied to your job. So, I get health insurance because my wife's got a corporate job.
Yeah.
But we're already talking like, what, she's going to retire in a few years. What's going to happen? So
you don't continue to get benefits when she's retired?
No.
Does she?
No.
Really?
Yeah. So we're looking at me, potentially, teaching audio and getting our health benefits off of a teaching gig.
Right. Yeah. I looked into some health insurance stuff here. So like the basics are covered here. If you have to go to the doctor, you don't have to pay anything. If you have to go to the hospital, you don't have to pay anything. If you need a surgery, you don't have to pay anything. But there are other expenses that do exist, like medications. Dental isn't covered here, and eyes aren't covered here. But those kind of things are covered with health insurance if you were a teacher, for example. And I've looked into buying private insurance, but it doesn't really make sense. I think I'm better off just paying the dentist when I have to go to the dentist than thousands and thousands of dollars every year.
Yeah, it's a challenging business that we've chosen to be in, whether you're in Canada or the US, or anywhere else in the world for that matter. And there are definitely, I've stuck it out this long, and part of the reason I've been able to stick it out is my wife's, willingness to work a corporate job. So it takes the edge off, but it doesn't completely clear you of everything.
Yeah.
We know people who have, husband and wives who both work for big tech companies, and we're like, oh my gosh, those guys, they have a giant ass house.
Yeah. I'm assuming we're around the same age, but it's, I 50, see that
55.
Yeah. I'm 54. So I'm seeing that now where it's like, oh, that guy's making $500,000 a year now. I'm not, but a lot of those people, like, they don't love their job, but we're also getting to that age. We're going to start seeing our peers retiring as well. Like, I guess your wife's going to retire. It's like, but that's the other thing. I never really thought of the work that I do as a type of work where I would retire. I've been doing this since before it was a job, and I'll continue doing it after it's a job. And I don't even know what retirement would look like to me, because I would do this anyway.
Yeah. And I was at this event, and there was a lot of other adults there who clearly had, jobs as hedge fund managers or
Yeah.
commercial real estate or whatever. There was a lot of wealth in the room. And, you go into situations like that, and the feeling of inadequacy as an adult starts to kick in, and you think, am I doing the right thing? Look at all these fuckers in this room making like $500,000 a year. And then I think, but you know what? At the end of the day, I really love what I do.
And when you start talking to those people, you realize that they would trade for your work in a second. Usually that's the experience, is that, I mean, even athletes, all athletes wish they're rappers. Rappers want to be athletes and athletes want to be rappers. But it's like being involved in music is really something that most people that we've come across in our age, most of the people we've come across from, let's say, age 20 until now, probably 98% of them aren't in this field anymore. So in that way, whatever we're doing something right, where we haven't had to stop for some reason or another. And I do consider myself like very, very, very lucky that somehow, like I got a gig today. I was just on the phone right 15 minutes before we spoke to mix someone's record. And it's like a young girl in her mid-20s, and they like some records that I've done, and I spoke with their manager, and it just feels great. And it's like, all right, there, it's a couple weeks of work. I'm going to get paid, and I'm going to love it. And hopefully they'll love what I do. And I feel really lucky. And it's different. Every project from one to the next is different. And that's also exciting. Learning is exciting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Learning things by accident is especially exciting. And also, I know there are a lot of engineers out there who work at studios who are stuck doing these like 12, 14-hour days. That's not my experience at all.
Mine either.
I start working when I want to start working, and I get my mixing done that I need to get done. Sometimes it'll be a late night, but sometimes I'm like, I'm going to go today from 10 to 4 because it's a beautiful day out. And this artist doesn't need this stuff today. And I'll send them a message. Cool if I start up again tomorrow. Yeah. And that's a real huge benefit to this work, where when you're focused and doing your bit, like there's no point in when you've passed a certain point and you're mixing, it's not like, unless you're doing stems or something, there's no point in doing it. You know what I mean? If you've lost your kind of creative flow and you're not kind of in it, it's not worth the time to spend a couple hours doing something, because odds are the next day you're going to pull it up and you're going to be like, you're going to undo those 2 hours in like 10 seconds.
Right. And it's 2 hours that you could have spent with your kid or taken a nap or, hung with friends or whatever.
There are, of course, opposite situations where, in the case like earlier where we were talking about the kind of feast or famine mode, where I might get two artists who want something done at exactly the same time. And I'll say yes to both. And I'll start at 9 in the morning and I will go till 9 or 10 at night. I make sure to take lots of ear breaks in between. But in those cases, I don't have the luxury of, I'm going to go hang out outside for a couple hours. And that's also challenging and hard too. But more often than not, I think we have the ability to kind of carve out a reasonable schedule. I mean, when I was a musician, there was no schedule. I worked every day, all day. I would record on the weekends, all weekend, whatever. It was only when I had a kid where I was like, oh, I can take weekends off. I don't need to work over the weekend.
That's a key thing. Like we both, like I've got two kids. You got one.
Yeah.
I made a conscious decision. I was like, okay, I have to be around. I may sacrifice some potential success by doing that, but that's okay, because now I've got one in college and one who's about to be a senior in high school. And, you know, I feel like, all right, they're about to like leave the nest. I'm going to get out in the world and just kick ass even more.
Yeah. And that's good modeling, I think, for your kids too. I have some very successful musician friends who missed their kids growing up because they were just on the road, and they don't have any regrets over it, but there's a bit of sadness there where they're like, yeah, some of these guys are gone like 150 days a year, like really, really intense tour schedules when they were in their 20s and early 30s and things were popping off like mad. They couldn't say no. Like, if I don't want to do something now and I don't feel like I have to do it, I won't do it. Or I'll figure out a way to do it on my own terms. As long as the work is good at the end of the day, it's just like with gear. You figure it out.
Yeah.
You get there one way or another, right?
Well, on that note, we are at a time. Howie, thank you so much for taking the time for me. It's so great to talk to you. I know that we interact in our little Signal group, but it's nice to just like talk with you and hear your perspective on this stuff. And for the audience, it's HowieBeck.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'll put a link in the show notes for everybody.
Not that anyone will ever go to a website, but yes.
Some people will. Some people look at the show notes. I hope you guys do, because
I have my own satellite radio station. No, I don't.
Well, great to hang with you here and chat. But yeah, until next time, take care and thanks again.
You too. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. See ya.